Welcome to Midweek Geek here on Geek Therapy Radio, and Apple's WWDC 2019 has come and went. It's Worldwide Developers Conference, and Apple gave its keynote. And here in this Midweek Geek, I want to go over some of the highlights of that keynote, some of the things I'm excited about, and some of the disappointments.
Yeah.
This is Geek Therapy Radio.
What are we waiting for?
And now your mental curator, Johnny Hamburger.
Okay, so I'm going to go over some of the, I don't want to call them lesser points of interest. It's just kind of lesser points of interest to me because what we were all waiting for, and in fact I made a video about this several months ago about should you wait to buy a MacBook Pro here in 2019 or wait for any 2019 model MacBook Pros. We didn't get any new news about any sort of next generation MacBook Pro. Now, recently the MacBook Pro all across the board did get iterative updates to the processors, including in the MacBook Pro 15-inch. You can now get up to 8 cores in the new MacBook Pro. Not the new MacBook Pro, the old the current model of MacBook Pro now comes with 8 cores. We didn't get the big redesign we were hoping for this year. That's yet to be announced. It was not announced at WWDC 2019, so I am disappointed in that. I wanted to see, among other things, and maybe I was semi-alone in this, the MacBook Pro 13-inch, I wanted to see it a little thicker. I wanted to see the 15-inch a little thicker as well for thermal design to handle the thermals so they don't throttle so much in a Pro device. But I wanted to see dedicated graphics in the MacBook Pro 13-inch. Just nothing major, nothing huge, just kind of AMD's MX150 or MX250 equivalent. You know, NVIDIA has the MX250 in their thin and light portables, paired up with quad-core systems. So I wanted to see kind of the same thing in the MacBook Pro 13-inch. Just keep it quad-core, but add just a little dedicated AMD GPU on the side there to help with things, mostly video editing, photo editing, and maybe some light gamings. But we didn't get that. We did not get that, at least as of WWDC 2019. So here's what we did get. And I'm going to touch on this more as we go along. I actually kind of wanted to focus on this, was the new Mac Pro announcement. We've been waiting for years. Lots of us in the computer industry, especially Mac users, have been waiting for a new Mac Pro. The previous Mac Pro, aka the trash can, came out several years ago and it was outdated. It was very hard to update. Users wanted a new Mac Pro that you could update yourself, meaning you can put in a new hard drive, you can throw in extra RAM, you can update the graphics cards as needed, you can update the PCIe cards as needed. So the new Mac Pro allows all of that, but we'll get into that in a second. Let's start with the lesser notes of WWDC. So there were other things that were announced. These are just kind of my condensed list of things that, at least in my opinion, interested me the most. Okay, Apple Arcade on the Apple 4K TV now supports Xbox One S and PlayStation DualShock 4 controllers. That's amazing. I have, it's in my backpack back there. I've got an Xbox One S controller, even though I don't own an Xbox One S. Actually, I have 2 Xbox One S controllers. One that I keep in my backpack at all times, and one that I keep paired with my HT PC at home, my home theater PC, which has a good graphics card in it. I do a lot of my gaming on my home theater PC at home, so I have an Xbox One S controller that stays at home, and an Xbox One S controller that stays with me wherever I am in my backpack. That's really good news that Apple TV and Apple Arcade on Apple TV now supports Xbox One S controllers and PlayStation DualShock 4 controllers. That's awesome. That is thumbs up, kudos for me. That's amazing. I'm very happy to see that. Okay, the second thing is, as far as the Apple Watch is concerned, in OS 6, the biggest takeaway for me was that the App Store is coming directly to Apple Watch in OS 6. Previously, you had to you always had to have the Apple Watch paired to an iPhone, of course. That makes sense, and you had to get apps through the iPhone that would go over to the Apple Watch. Now you can have the App Store for Apple Watch on the watch itself, meaning you don't need to necessarily have your phone paired up to it necessarily or maybe you do. Either way, the App Store is now on the watch. You can get apps on your watch through the watch without going through the phone first. That's pretty cool. I don't own an Apple Watch. I'm in favor of the Samsung Gear watch. I have the Gear S2 still, but that's just because I rock a Samsung Galaxy Note 9, and Samsung devices play well together, and Apple devices play well together. So if you have an iPhone, I'm not going to suggest getting a Samsung Gear for it. Yes, it will work with it, but doesn't play so nice. Get an Apple Watch if you have an iPhone. Okay, iOS 13, speaking of iPhones, the big standouts for iOS 13 to me were the smaller downloads. The apps that you download are going to be significantly smaller, and the updates are going to be smaller. I theorize that means that more of the apps usage is going to take place in the cloud. I'm not entirely sure how that works. All I know is that your downloads will be smaller and the updates will be smaller. Also coming to iOS 13 is dark mode, and something that's been on Android for several years, swipe typing on the keyboard, meaning that to type the word geek, or that's not a very good example. Radio, you just do R-A-D-I-O, swipe. Never have to lift your finger to swipe it around the keyboard, and it'll recognize as you stop over each letter. That's something that's been on Android for several years. Still cool that it's coming to the iPhone. I'm not necessarily knocking Apple for not having swipe typing. The other cool thing for us, especially in the radio industry, and of course all the consumers out there, is that Siri now has access to live radio through a partnership with iHeartRadio and TuneIn Radio and other various outlets. So iHeartRadio is now linked up with Siri, which is really cool. That means you can say, Siri, play Geek Therapy Radio on iHeartRadio, or on 10 p.m. Central Time Saturday nights, you can say, Siri, play KPRC 950 AM in Houston. And Siri will start playing Geek Therapy Radio for it as it broadcasts live in Houston. So that's pretty cool. You may be wondering what's going on with the iPad? How does iOS 13 translate to the iPad? Well, apparently they're doing away with that naming scheme from what I gathered from the WWDC, and they're just calling it iPadOS. So some of the improvements that come to the new iPadOS are improvements, thank God, to the file manager and memory stick support. If you plug in a memory stick to the Lightning port or to the USB-C port on the iPad Pro, you get much better support, and especially through the file manager of any external hard drives, what have you, connected through whatever port is on your iPad. There's a massive disappointment there, though. Massive disappointment. I thought for everything that Apple was announcing with iOS 13 and with the new iPadOS, I was crossing my fingers hoping that they would give us finally mouse support for iPad. That makes so much sense, and that is something that we have been waiting for. I do have an iPad. I use my iPad every single day, actually. If Apple would give us mouse support on the iPad, that would make the iPad 1,000 times more useful. iPad Pro doesn't even have mouse support. If they gave mouse support for iPad products, I would use my laptop less. So they've improved the file manager. There's two things that we wanted for the iPad. We wanted an improved file manager, which we got, and we wanted mouse support, which we still haven't been given yet. Apple, please give us Bluetooth mouse support, at least for the iPad, please. Okay, so all of that aside, with the last few minutes here, I want to focus on what you were all waiting for, what we've all been waiting for, that most people in the computer industry have been waiting for: a new Mac Pro. They've announced the new Mac Pro, and it's a doozy on every level. And, well, I'll get to it in a second. So you can get the new Mac Pro with up to 28-core Intel Xeon processor. It comes with 6-channel, 12-slot, ECC-compatible memory up to 2933 megahertz, and memory capacity up to 1.5 terabytes of RAM. That's not solid-state storage. That is up to 1.5 terabytes of RAM. That's awesome. That is absolutely staggering. That's incredible. So the new Mac Pro comes with 8 PCIe slots and official support from most industry leaders, such as Avid. Avid makes Pro Tools, and Avid makes other pro industry software, video and audio editing software. So let's get into some details here. The 8-core Xeon base model starts at $6,000. $6,000 gets you in the door with a base model Mac Pro, and it's estimated that if you get this thing fully spec'd out, it'll cost you upwards of $35,000 for the 1.5 terabytes of RAM, for the 4 terabytes of bulk storage, for the 28-core Xeon processor. You're spending, you can buy a Tesla or you can buy a Mac Pro. That's where it's at now. If you want to get the other big deal is the new 6K monitor. The new 6K monitor, 6K resolution monitor, it alone starts at $5,000, $4,099, $999, plus $1,000 just for the stand. That means you can get the display by itself for $5,000. If you tack on an extra $1,000, you can get Apple's stand for it. It's just a piece of metal. It's just $1,000 piece of metal. The new 6K display is called the Pro Display XDR. XDR stands for Extra Dynamic Resolution, and it's available this far. Okay, so all in, let's say you want to get the new Mac Pro and the new Pro Display XDR. That means you can spend upwards and over $40,000 for a new MacBook, for a new Mac Pro setup with the new Pro Display XDR monitor. I am not, hear me on this, I am not denying the howitzer cannon power of the new Mac Pro. That is a staggering amount of power in such a cool container, I'll say, the cheese grater container, for lack of a better description. Very cool, not doubting the specs and the modular nature of this, meaning you can have an upgrade path as you go along. You can swap things out, you can upgrade. We haven't had that in a Mac Pro for quite a while now. That's great. That's great. That's great. The Pro Display XDR is a phenomenal monitor. As far as color accuracy and pro use, undeniable. 32-inch, 6K resolution, color accuracy, and certified by all sorts of different codecs. Amazing. All of this, the Mac Pro and the Pro Display XDR is available in the fall. If you want to spend up to $40,000 on a new computer setup, you can, starting in the fall of 2019. So I'll get back to that in one moment. The last thing I want to say that they announced at WWDC 2019 is some cool new features for macOS Catalina on MacBook Pro. So the new macOS is called Catalina, and for the MacBook Pro, the coolest feature to me is called Sidecar, which turns your iPad into a secondary display next to your MacBook Pro. That's awesome. Right now, I've been using, just with my Windows PC, an app called Duet Display, which is really cool in itself. But to have official support now, as far if you're a MacBook Pro user, to have official support with an app called Sidecar that wirelessly, does it wirelessly? Let me double check on that. I will annotate that if you're watching the video. I'll annotate it below. But it turns your iPad into a secondary display to your MacBook Pro. That's really good. No qualms about that, Apple. That's awesome. The ridiculous thing is that Logic, the audio production program, now supports over 1,000 audio tracks. Let me tell you something. If you're in a professional environment and you're getting up to 1,000 audio tracks, you're fired. That is extremely inefficient. That means you don't know what you're doing. 1,000 audio tracks? I can't even picture an orchestra arrangement that would need 1,000 audio tracks. I know what they're saying. They're just saying that there's all this overhead, means that theoretically you can support over 1,000 audio tracks. Should you have a project with 1,000 audio tracks? Nobody on earth should have 1,000 audio tracks open. I'm not even going to speculate how many maximum tracks a professional should have open, but whatever. That's a whole nother can of worms argument. Okay, so here's my final thoughts on this, and I'm going to stick to the Mac Pro here. I've heard a lot of complaints, and I have been the first, I will admit, to keep Apple honest, I'll just say. To call Apple out where I see Apple needs to be called out. The 2018 MacBook Pro throttling issue. Apple deserved to be called out on that. You can spend almost $7,000 on a laptop and not get, the performance that you were promised after spending that much money. It throttles down to barely sustaining base clock when you're advertised 4.8 gigahertz across all 6 cores. Ridiculous. Apple did deserve to be called out for that. Even though it wasn't 100% Apple's fault, I do concede that. A lot of people are complaining, obviously, and understandably, about the new prices for the Mac Pro, that it starts at $6,000, and fully spec'd out, you can spend over $35,000 just for the computer itself, not talking about the $5,000 Pro Display XDR. A lot of people saying that is astronomical money, which I do agree. But here's the thing, though. Here's why I'm not completely raking Apple over the coals for this. Apple is not marketing has never marketed, but is not marketing the Mac Pro, especially the new Mac Pro that starts at $6,000. They're not marketing it towards the general consumer. It's not for the person who's looking at a MacBook Air and a Mac Pro. That's not the consumer. The customer base for Mac Pro has always been professionals. You do not buy a Mac Pro to watch YouTube videos or to scrub through Facebook or whatever. That's not what it's for. It is for professionals. The market that's going to be buying Mac Pros is the type of market that it's going to be a company putting it on a company credit card, a production house, an audio, high-end recording studio, a high-end television studio, television production. Only the highest-end YouTubers are going to be buying something like the Mac Pro. The average Joe isn't going to go out and spend $35,000 on this, but a company, a massive company, a large production house, a rendering farm is going. Disney's going to buy this thing. Sony's going to buy this thing. Video game developers are going to buy this thing, buy the Mac Pro. That's who it's marketed for. So I don't buy into all the hype of, wow, this is so expensive. What is Apple doing? Apple is out of their minds with how much this costs. I think, given who they're marketed towards, it makes sense. It's going on the company credit card. It's not going on your personal credit card. It's going after the company black card, the business card. Just put it on my company's credit line. That's who they're marketing this towards. So I don't think all the hype and the flame fires coming at Apple from the general consumer starts at $6,000. That's not completely warranted. You're not buying this to scrub through Facebook. But now I'm repeating myself. That's all I have to say about that. I've got no beef with the price of the new Mac Pro. It's not. Let's just wrap it up there. I'm Johnny Hemberger. Thanks for listening to Midweek Geek. Be good to yourselves, and I'll catch you in the next episode of Geek Therapy Radio. See you next time.